Welcome to the reading corner of Dreamers Defy. We are reading Vengeful by AJ Parnell. We are on chapter 7, and if this is your first time joining us, you might want to go back to the beginning of the list here and watch all the way from the introduction, or you can just jump right in. Now, if you go down into the description, you will find that there is a link to this book on Amazon. If you'd like to get your very own copy, you can go there and do so. And that's where you will find it. Now, if it is your first time here, like I said, go back to the introduction, start there, catch up with us, and then we'll read it one chapter at a time. Right now, we are on chapter 7. So without further ado, let's get to it. Vengeful, chapter 7, If Only. Haggard and worn down from his disquieting day, Luke knelt beside the couch as he finished picking up the broken shards of glass strewn about his living room. Next to Luke, Emily stared down at his stress-worn features, crossed her arms tight about her, and asked, "Is it safe?" Careful not to dump the newly collected glass, Luke started for the trash. "For now." Emily followed. "She won't stop until she ends you. You know that, right?" Luke tossed the busted shards into the black can. Too late, he spotted Izzy. The ghost of an 8-year-old child with the black eyes, shot through with crimson lines and bulging out of their sockets. Luke groaned, "Sorry, Izzy," as a fragment of pieces passed through the girl and rattled down into the bottom of the wastebasket. "Did you hear me?" Emily squawked. Of course he heard her. He always heard her, even when he tried everything within his powers not to. "Yes, I heard you." "Yet you still want to go on with your idiotic plan to destroy our things tonight?" Setting the broom and dustpan aside, Luke shrugged. "That's the plan." Andrea floated into the open doorway. "Are you sure that will set our souls free?" "Yes," Luke assured Andrea. "No," Emily argued. Sitting in a far corner, Tyler tossed his imaginary ball up into the air. "Which is it?" All eyes turned to Luke. Wearily, he pulled out a chair and sat. "Look, guys, we've been over this. From everything Emily learned in her class, added to what I've discovered about souls being tethered to the earth plane, if those items are destroyed, your spirits will be free to move into the light and on to the next life." In a huff, Emily plopped down onto the table. Well, she appeared to plop down because, as a spirit without form, there was not a lot of force she could generate. As with the other ghosts constantly in Luke's presence, the teen could only move things around when she saved up enough energy or had fits of rage that usually caused him a pounding headache. "You're forgetting something." Luke ran a hand down his face. "What?" "That suicide victims are not like other ghosts. Due to the horrific nature of our taking our own lives, the soul is shrouded in dark energy, blocked from the light, stuck on earth, and cannot leave this plane until we find peace and make things right." Moving out of the trash can, Izzy floated up to Emily. "How do we do that?" Emily fixed Luke with a glare. "By making sure Abigail pays for what she did and that she'll never hurt anyone else." All eyes turned to Luke. He shot up angrily out of his chair and sent it flying backward. "Emily, I didn't steal these things in order for you to get revenge. I took them so we could destroy them in order for you 5 to move on. We agreed." Emily calmly placed both hands on her translucent knees. "Those things are the only items we have in our arsenal. If you destroy them and you're wrong, then Abigail will hold all the cards, and we 5 will be stuck here forever." Hand to her heart, Andrea studied Luke. "Is that true?" Izzy ran over and sat in Tyler's lap, hiding her face in his shoulder. The teen, obviously upset, wrapped his arms around Izzy as if protecting a little sister. "Well, Professor?" Andrea asked you a question. Luke sighed. Look, guys, I'm working on it. This isn't exact science or foolproof. Truth be told, Luke had been occupied on exorcising these ghosts, these visions or delusions, ever since he had woken up in the hospital from his second near-death experience. Nothing he had done had worked. If anything, his efforts had only enhanced his interactions instead of sending them into the afterlife as he had so desperately hoped. Then again, if they were just a figment of his imagination, delusions from his ordeal, then giving credence to them was sure to make the situation worse, wasn't it? God, how he wished he could talk to Abigail about all of this. A bitter laugh escaped him. Great. The one living person he wanted to talk to more than anything was Abigail. Problem was, according to the ghosts who were currently haunting him, Abby was hell-bent on destroying him. After surviving the shooting, he had been lost, adrift on a sea of pain, guilt, doubt, and fear. Then, upon a mandatory order from the university, Luke had started going to Abigail for help. It had taken months of therapy, but one day he found himself hopeful again, almost happy. Before long, Abby worked her way into his heart, and he had dared to dream again, risk letting down his guard, and allowed someone back in. It was also during that time that Luke began helping Emily, just as Abigail had assisted him. Not surprisingly, Emily blamed herself for the shooting, for ending the relationship with Kevin, the abusive young man who would eventually come to the school and end the lives of so many. Luke spent a great deal of his free time counseling with the young woman and found a sense of peace in knowing that he was encouraging her to find her way back, just as Abigail had guided him. Then on that late September day, when he had switched his phone back on after class, he heard the despondent voicemail from Emily, saying that she just couldn't face another moment of being responsible for those people's deaths, and that she was going to end her own life. His world began to crumble. From the call, he could hear the faint sound of a train and knew instantly where Emily had gone. Racing out of the school, Luke remembered the hammering in his chest as he jumped in his car and raced to the nearby tracks. He could still hear the faint roar of the train as it made its way ever closer to the school, where the tracks ran just a few hundred feet away. When he got to the crossing, he jumped out of his car while calling out her name. Still recovering from his injuries a few short months earlier, Luke had battled his fatigue and fear as he raced down the tracks, up the hill, then stumbled as he saw her standing between the iron tracks, eyes void of emotion, and the train's light reflecting off the tears that streamed down her pretty face. Luke reached for her, knowing in his soul that it was already too late. Just before the train hit her, Emily looked at him and gave a sad, knowing smile. Emily's death, as horrible as it was, had not been his final undoing. That blow came from Abigail's betrayal days after Emily's funeral. His soul battered, his mind frayed. Luke went to the one person he had allowed himself to count on and found a stranger. Even now, he could feel the heavy weight of Abigail's rejection as she stood there, acting like he was nothing more than a regular patient, telling him he needed to respect the patient-doctor boundaries that she had established at the onset of the treatment. Luke had been dumbfounded by Abigail's behavior. Gone was the loving, sweet woman who had made love to him, who had held him after he woke, body soaked in sweat, shaking from his nightmares. There was no one to explain the sudden change in her behavior, no reason. There was no witness present who could verify the two of them were not only friends, but also lovers. Abigail's once inviting smile turned into cold indifference as she threatened to call security if he didn't leave immediately. Confused, Luke begged Abigail to explain what had happened, what was wrong. Even now, the pain of her parting words that day had the power to pierce his heart. You should follow Emily's example. You couldn't save her, and you can't save yourself. Luke, why bothering putting it off any longer? Abigail's words had cut through him faster and more effectively than the bullets from Kevin's rifle. Shamefully, Luke stood there in shock, his eyes pleading until Abigail followed through with her threat and had him removed from the building. For weeks, he went over the events of Emily's death and Abigail's betrayal, but his broken mind couldn't process the combined traumas or cope with the additional loss. So he decided to take the easy way out and end it by taking a bottle of his pain medication mixed with large dose of anxiety pills just to ensure they did the job. But he made the mistake of making one last call to Abigail. Looking back, he still had no idea why she had come to his office. According to Emily, Abigail had come to gloat, to see for herself that Luke died. Unfortunately, Luke would never know for sure because as fate would have it, Zach, the student who always seemed to be at the right place at the right time, had shown up. Emily told Luke that Abigail had only called the ambulance after Zach demanded it, thus forcing her hand. Otherwise, she would not have made that call to save his life. Even so, Luke did not have time to ponder Abigail's involvement with his near overdose, because little did he know, waking up would only be the beginning of his problems. When he first came to, it was easy to dismiss the shadows that danced in and out of his vision. But when those shadows started talking, he knew he was in trouble. Luke fought hard to keep it together during the 72-hour holding period, when the doctors at the mental health facility were required to keep him, but hold it together he did. It took a great deal of convincing, but in the end, Luke made the doctors believe that he was no longer a threat to himself, and they reluctantly let him go. The truth, however, was that he was far from okay. In the days that followed, the shadows that Luke had so quickly dismissed began to take form and find their voice. Try as he might, he could not quiet them. He could not take enough meds or drink enough alcohol to drown them out. Since Emily's ghost seemed to be the most persistent, Luke decided if he had lost his mind, he might as well go all in and listen. It was then that Luke came to understand the true horror of their current situation and how close he had come to sharing their fate. "Where's Richard?" Andrea asked and brought Luke out of his musings. Emily looked around the room. "I have no idea." "You didn't lose the box, did you?" Izzy squeaked as she leapt to her feet. Luke knew the box was safe, hidden in a place no one would find it. No, of course not. Worried, Tyler got to his feet. "Dude, seriously? We're always stuck together. Always." Out of breath, Richard shimmered through the wall and fell onto the kitchen floor. "St. Luke, we have a problem." Startled, everyone stood and gawked at the falling specter. Richard lifted himself up on his elbows. "That bitch has another set of trophies." Emily squeaked in alarm. "What?" Disgusted, Richard shook his head. "On all of us." Tears formed in Andrea's eyes. "That can't be." With a bitter laugh, Richard sat up and pointed at Andrea. "Pie plate." Looking over at Tyler and Izzy, he motioned. "Bow from your hair at the lethal sleepover and a sports jersey from you that your dad had framed." Shock showed on the ghostly faces as they looked at one another. Richard dusted off his suit jacket and laughed. "Oh, and somehow, she got a lock of your hair, Emily. So I guess we're all screwed." Sliding through the table, Emily walked over to Richard. "How do you know?" "I got yanked back to her place about an hour ago when she took an old tie of mine that she had kept." Richard rested his arms on his knees and gave Luke a sarcastic grin. "So, Professor, St. Luke, and brave savior of ours, what now? Does it look like burning that box you've got is going to do the trick after all?" Face grim, Luke studied their anxious faces. "We go with Plan B." Luke growled as he stormed out of the kitchen. Whirling after him in an excited flurry, the ghost rushed through the door as Luke grabbed his black jacket, a pair of leather gloves, and his car keys, and stepped out of the house into the night. Strolling into her spotless apartment, Abigail set her bag and keys aside on a white, polished console table, then switched on the lights. Humming, she strolled over to the entertainment center and turned on the melodious tune, filling the space, open-themed apartment. Everything was in its place, the room a perfect temperature and not a speck of dust to mar the light furnishings that sat upon the high-polished floors. Oh, how she wished every place she spent time in was as nice as this little slice of heaven. But alas, maybe it was best that the rest of the world wasn't as beautiful, because it made coming home all the sweeter. Abigail removed her jacket, hanging it on one of the bar stools that sat tuckily safe, up and under the bar, separating the kitchen from the living room. Removing a long-stemmed wine glass from one of the cabinets, Abigail reached down and opened a small wine cooler and pulled out a 2017 Le Bobo Grand Chat, one of her favorite red wines, that had a light-bodied, fruit-forward taste that she knew she could pair with just about any of the fine cuts of meat she was craving. However, considering she had already dined this evening, she would just enjoy a nice glass of wine by the fireplace. As she filled her glass, Abigail's mood suddenly darkened as she thought back on the events of the day. Why had she left those precious effects in her office? Those things should have been safe in her office with security cameras, guards, locked doors. But unfortunately for her, those devices had not impeded the damn thief. Sighing, Abigail went to the couch, took a seat, and grabbed the remote next to her, and hit the on switch. The gas fireplace burst to life as hot flames reflected in Abigail's deep blue eyes. In her mind, there was little doubt as to the identity of the one who had broken into her office. Luke. To be honest, Abigail should not have been surprised. Besides being handsome and caring, Luke was also quite brilliant. Well, he was intelligent when he wasn't dealing with all the emotional trauma that this past year encumbered him with. Still, she had to admit, the fact that her favorite handsome professor had actually broken into the facility shocked and amazed her. What could have driven him to do such a reckless thing? How did he know where to find that box? And more importantly, why would he take it? Distracted, Abigail tapped the wine glass with the tip of her long fingernail. Kitch had better have recovered her things from Luke's, or the director of her facility would have a lot bigger things to worry about. Taking a sip of her wine, Abigail thought back to the time with Luke. When he first started seeing her after that horrible shooting, she knew he was a man of integrity. Luke was strong, smart, and funny when he finally let his guard down. More fascinating than all those things was his deep empathy for others. It didn't take long for her to become fascinated with the young, wounded professor. Not only did he believe that one person could make a difference, but he also believed that he himself could influence the young lives of those he encountered as a teacher and mentor. In her practice, there were a great deal of people who would spout off about the kind of noble rhetoric, especially in their first few visits with her. But the fact that this man had chosen to stand between his students and an enraged gunman, well, that set Luke apart from those who just talked about their good intentions. Luke had a hero, or as he liked to call it, knight in shining armor, complex. Though Abigail was always professional and intent with her clients, she was an especially devoted counselor to this fascinating man. How thrilling those weeks and months with Luke had been. There were such interesting layers to him. Despite how caring Luke was, she found that he did not give his trust easily or willingly, which surprised her. Luke was perceptive, or perhaps just more guarded after his trauma. Taking the last sip of her wine, Abigail gently placed the glass on the table beside her. After months of working with Luke, she found her own walls had begun to crumble. Not so much from her desire to share her personal life with another, but from the fact that Luke's emotional wounds seemed to heal faster as he listened to her tell him about her tragic past. Before she knew it, they had built a bridge of shared traumas as she let herself be vulnerable, fragile, thus allowing Luke to become the hero in her own story. Soon, contrary to Abigail's usual professionalism, they became lovers. Luke proved himself to be the wonderful and caring man she had deemed him to be. The sex was amazing, the secret they shared tantalizing, and Luke was truly a good man by every meaningful measure, someone who, by any normal societal standard, would be worth every bit of the effort to maintain a relationship with. But things changed when Emily came to the clinic for an emergency session. Tricia, her normal therapist, was out that day, and Abigail offered to help the troubled teen, remembering that Luke had been actively counseling his young student ever since the shooting. 8 long months after the incident, the girl was still wavering back and forth between thinking it was or wasn't her fault. It was no wonder to Abigail why the young woman blamed herself. She knew that her breakup with Kevin had been the trigger that had set the guy off, thus ending the lives of over a dozen students. Still, Luke had been vigilant in his efforts to convince Emily that she was not to blame, that she was right in entering a dangerous relationship with someone who had continually threatened to harm her. No one had to tell Abigail that when the girl teetering on the edge found her way into her office, the stakes had been high, even more so due to her strong attachment to Luke. Abigail had known that, in Luke's mind, he felt he was helping Emily overcome her guilt in the shooting would help him overcome his as well. Using all her expertise and carefully chosen words, Abigail counseled Emily that night, and at the end of their session, encouraged Emily to call Luke as she left the enchantment facility. There was no way she could have known that by doing this, she would cause Luke to find Emily on the train tracks and make him witness the horrific incident. Abigail stared blankly at the flickering flames of her fireplace. She didn't learn about the tragedy until the next morning when she had overheard it from her gossiping coworkers. Once the news sank in, Abigail's heart began to race. She knew it would not be long before Luke staggered into her office, mind reeling and heart broken. If she allowed her patient to gather her up into his arms as she comforted him, there would be no doubt in her coworkers' minds that she had crossed many, if not all, professional lines. Luke would be assigned a new counselor, and her professional career would be over. Mind whirling, Abigail devised a backup plan for the impending horrible situation. She went to her office, summoned Vera to her desk, and instructed her assistant to cancel all her appointments for that day, hoping she would be able to contact Luke and arrange a private meeting. Abigail called Luke multiple times, but he had been unable to be reached. So she decided to lock up her office and go in search of her troubled professor. Unfortunately, before Abigail could exit the lobby, Luke arrived, disheveled and in an inconsolable state. Abigail tried to remain professional in front of her coworkers, which further incensed Luke. Reaching out to her, Luke begged and pleaded like a madman, demanding she explain why she was acting so indifferent toward him. Unable to reason with Luke, she was forced to call security, threatening to have him locked up and put under observation if he didn't leave immediately. Prepared to go through with her threat or risk everything she had worked for, Abigail stood like a statue and watched as Luke, his mind reeling, staggered away from her and somehow made his way outside before security arrived. A few days later, Luke called her cell. He was broken, confused, alone, and desperate to make sense of everything that had happened. But once again, with an associate standing in her office, she was forced to maintain her professionalism. As she listened to Luke's defeated voice, Abigail tried to speak calmly and give him sound advice, despite her torrent of emotions. In the weeks that followed, Abigail kept tabs on Luke the best she could and was surprised to discover that he had somehow managed to continue going to work and to function. For a little over a month, all was quiet until he barged into her office once more, demanding that she tell the truth about their relationship. At that point, in front of her administrator and assistant, Abigail knew there was no going back. There was no returning to her relationship with Luke, nor was she willing to confess it. Instead, she called the police and filed a restraining order. Luke had stood there for a few brief moments, giving Abigail one last chance to do the right thing as she watched the last glimmer of hope dim in his soft brown eyes. Chin up, Abigail had straightened, strengthening her resolve. Luke nodded sadly in understanding. Then, with tears brimming in his eyes, he quietly left the room. For a little over a month, Abigail was able to go on with her life without further incidents until, without warning, Luke called her one last time. Dejected, he told her that he was going to take her last suggestion and finish the prescription pills she had prescribed to him before ending their doctor-patient relationship. Abigail was unsure that Luke had understood her actual instructions, considering the fragile state he had been in when they last talked, and worried that he would not take the pills as she intended. An hour or so later, unable to shake her feeling of unease, she informed her staff about what was going on and let them know that she was going to check on Luke despite the restraining order. It took little effort to have the maintenance man let her into Luke's office. Once inside, she found that all was quiet. Then something shiny caught her eye, and she looked down to find an expensive pen, one that had been given to Luke by one of his students and that he was very rarely without. Abigail picked it up, almost transported back to memories of their time together. Luke was always twirling the pen around his fingers during one of their sessions, whether having coffee at some weekend getaway or while they watched some mindless TV show at his apartment. She awoke from her daydream when she heard a labored breath coming from the other side of Luke's desk. Abigail went around the large oak bureau and found Luke, face pale, lying on the ground, close to death. Just then, Zach, one of Luke's older students, had come to check on him and jumped into action. While she stood there dumb and mute, Zach raced over to Luke, checked his pulse, and ordered her to call an ambulance while he fought to keep his teacher alive. Troubled, Abigail got to her feet and walked over to the window. Despite all odds, Luke had survived his near overdosing and was later placed under observation at the enchantment facility. Of course, for numerous reasons, Luke was placed with a different therapist while he started a new regimen of treatments. It came as no surprise to Abigail to learn that Luke got on the fast track out of there. She knew he was smart enough to tell his new doctor what the man had wanted to hear in order to get out of the facility as soon as humanly possible. Luke had won his freedom. Before long, he was back to his old life and the ignorant observation of others. Seemed to be the old Luke they all knew and loved. Turning back to the fire, Abigail sighed. If Luke had left things alone, they might have both been able to get on with their lives. But no, he had to go in to break into her office and take her things. He had opened so many old wounds, and for what? Maybe he was looking for his pen. In the craziness of the day at his apartment, she had just held on to it. Obviously, there was no way or time to just walk it back over to him and engage in a little awkward small talk. The fact that he was crazy enough to break into her office meant she was right about not wanting to be anywhere near him if no onlookers were present. Tired, Abigail switched off the fireplace, turned off the living room lights, and vanished into her bedroom. Today she was done. She would figure out where to start with Luke in the morning. Sitting on the tailgate of an old truck, far away from the city lights, Luke took in the stark desert landscape illuminated by dim moonlight. A cool breeze drifted across the vast plains and caressed Luke's weary face, allowing him a short respite. Not far from him, crickets chirped as the night wind continued its journey, whistling through the prairie grasses as it chased the dark horizon countless miles away. For the first time in a long time, Luke had a moment of peace. Yes, perhaps it was just the proverbial calm before the storm, but considering the life he was forced to live, he would happily take it. Casting a glance back at the bed of the truck, Luke took note of the littered odds and ends. A sledgehammer, iron rods, a cooler, numerous 40-pound bags of salt. Beside him on the tailgate rested a small box. A low hum turned into a loud ring as the burner phone in Luke's pocket sounded. The fear and stress returned in an explosion of anxiety as Luke yanked the small phone out, flipped it open, and began to listen. Voice strained, Luke responded to the other person on the line. Got it. Any problems so far? Luke intently listened to the other person's response. Good. You okay with this? Luke lowered his head and fought back the tears that threatened to escape and flow down his face unchecked. Listen, I'm sorry for dragging you into this. Luke pulled out a .45 handgun from his pocket and studied it as if he waited for a response. I know you are. Yeah, I've got it right here. Irritated, Luke snapped. Yes, I know how to use it, but... Luke set the weapon down. I won't. Trust me. Suddenly unsure, Luke fixed his eyes upon the darkness that seemed to encroach him. I want you to pay attention to me for a second, all right? If anything goes wrong, Interrupted, Luke listened for a moment. I mean it. First sign of trouble. Eyes shut tight, Luke drew a shaky breath and nodded. You too. Hesitant, Luke ended the call, got to his feet, and once again scanned the area. Like a sentinel, a large metal cage sat a few yards before him, alone, standing guard in the open field. Face grim, Luke took to the battery and SIM card from the phone, laid everything on the ground, and stomped on them repeatedly. Gathering up the mangled pieces, Luke carried them over to a small hole that he had dug in the ground and dropped them inside. Kneeling, Luke filled the ditch, then methodically smoothed the fresh dirt over. In a few hours, with the wind picking up, there would be no sign that the phone had ever existed. The desert was like that. It held its secrets and kept them buried deep beneath miles of shifting sand. His body shaking from more than the chill in the air, Luke walked over to the ominous cage, reached out and touched it as he pled to the open air. God, please, don't make me do this. Luke listened, wished more than anything that he would hear the response he so longed for. Instead, there was only the gentle wind, rustling prairie grasses, and the insidious whisper of angry voices demanding justice. Tormented, Luke backed away from the cage and returned to the waiting truck. That is the end of chapter 7. We will get to chapter 8 very shortly. This is getting good. Go ahead and subscribe if you want to hear more reading videos like this one. We'll see you soon.